and I see it's live, we'll hear it back and I'll just silence the tab and then we'll record.
Okay.
So you went with the family to Japan? Do
Just with two friends, yeah.
you hear it, by the way?
I don't hear any echo.
Oh, okay. I think I silenced it. Okay. Right. Let's just see if he's coming on. All right. Hey, welcome to Social Issues. I'm your host, Dr. Mike, and well, we've got a really great program for you today. We're going to be talking about retirement. But yeah, retirement. Is that possible? Is there such a thing in America these days, and what's happening in the world? Well, we're going to be talking to the senior economic reporter who covers this, and for Business Insider. Noah, it's really fantastic to see you. I do have you on screen. Do you see me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So let's talk about what you're doing. And you've been working on this series for a long time about what working at 80 and older looks like, which is hard to believe that people in their 80s, either out of necessity or just because maybe they have a passion or love for working or they want to keep busy. Um, we have to talk about this. So uh, I'm I'm going to talk about you, and I just have a pop-up that just went on your Business Insider bio. And view, and I'll close that. So uh, let me just do this here. Let's talk a little bit just about what inspired you to write about retirement, because you're a young
Yeah.
guy.
I am definitely not maybe the age of somebody that you would think would be reporting on retirement. I'm just a few years out of college. But I gravitated toward this beat because nobody was really covering it, and I felt I would be the person to do so. Also, it's interesting being somebody part of the Gen Z generation that there's not really a ton of talk about what preparing for the future looks like. There's a bit of a resurgence, I guess, of people who are investing in the economy and caring more about their financial futures, but I think that there's a lot of financial education that gets lost in the curriculums of our schools and our universities. So I felt that I would be able to bring an interesting perspective of somebody who is just kind of starting my journey and is speaking with people who are three, in some cases, four times my age, who could talk about life lessons and things that they have learned along the way and what they can teach younger people about how to navigate the workplace or navigate their finances. So I have been working on a series since April that we have called 80 over 80. We originally intended to feature 80 people who are working at 80 and older. We realized quickly that that number would be surpassed and ended up being almost 200 folks that we were able to interview.
Wow.
And a lot of those people work out of necessity. Pretty much everyone I spoke with had never really spoken to media before, so that was really interesting navigating that process with them. A lot of them felt that even if they had made mistakes, they would want to share their stories as cautionary tales or as basically open books. Some of them actually have printed books, but they essentially just wanted to share their stories and what they have learned and share their regrets openly. So we started this series with the intention of kind of focusing on a demographic that has never received media attention before. It's kind of shocking that there's only a handful of articles, if you look it up, that there's covering 80-year-olds. And oftentimes the publications are focusing more so on the people who love to work and the people who are go-getters and healthy enough to keep going. Turns out that that's not accurate for a lot of the cohort. There's about 550,000 Americans who are 80 and older and still working. And those are your doctors, your lawyers, your people who retired 15, 20 years ago from their jobs that are just continuing to work to have something to do. But a lot of those folks are people who are economically challenged and are struggling to basically keep a roof over their heads. And it's shocking to people that there are so many of these folks who, are healthy enough to be alive and work into their 80s, but are not in financial positions where they can actually retire. So I know you had joked earlier, can we actually ever retire? And for a lot of these people, they're going to unfortunately be working until they can't.
Oh, that's really incredible. So I got to ask, like 200, was that interviewed like part of focus groups or do you individually found them?
Yeah, everyone was individual. I mean, obviously, there were some times too. Pretty much everyone was unconnected to another person in the series. It wasn't like I just went and spoke to 50 people in a graduating class who are all working. Most of the people were they were complete strangers to each other. And actually, a lot of them after the articles came out said, can you put me in touch with the other people in the articles? So that was really fun. But yeah, everyone that I found was whether they on LinkedIn and were posting. Facebook was another place I found people. I found people uh, that were friends of friends, friends, their grandparents. It was really interesting. I spoke to a couple of my friends' grandparents, so that was interesting. A lot of the people actually wrote to me, which was convenient but helpful. So a lot of these people had read an article that I wrote and said, "That's my story. I want to speak with you." So that definitely helped get the number up. And then they would refer me to their friends or their contacts. So sometimes I would speak with maybe two or three people at the same company that were all just happened to work into their 80s and above. Um, and then every now and then a colleague would help me out and say, "Oh, well, I know this might be interested in speaking." So it was basically just a big game of telephone of just everyone trying to help me find some of these workers because this is the demographic that I think is among the least uh public in many ways. It's rare that you see people on TikTok or social media saying, "Oh, look at me working at 90 years old." There's not really a lot of those people. And I actually intended fully to not really go that route. I didn't the famous people or the folks who had big platforms, because chances are they are not working out of necessity. Some of them are, but I really wanted to focus this series on kind of the unspoken voices, so the people who have really just never spoken to media before or not really public figures.
Yeah. Talk about you made a video, right, about would tell their younger selves. Uh, what was revealing for you with that?
Yeah, so we did a video that was for the kind of best people from the series. So we had already spoken to them, written about them, vetted them, and determined, okay, well, these are kind of four people who are all working at 80 and older and all work because they have to, and felt that this was kind of the most comprehensive group that we could of any four people. So we had a lot of geographic diversity. We spoke with people in rural, urban, and also a good mix of gender, racial diversity, and socioeconomic diversity, even within that cohort. So we really tried hard with the video to choose kind of like for the people who best represented the series. So we included in a short documentary. It's about 13 minutes long, and we just profiled them and spoke to them about why they continue to work, what their work entails. We were able to get some B-roll of people at their jobs. The video opens with an 84-year-old Uber driver who is mid-ride, and that was pretty stunning footage because I've used to cover Uber and Lyft and these rideshare companies back in the day, and I never found anybody who was in their 80s and still driving and has such a clean record. So we learned from these people that basically anything could go wrong at any time, and that's just the reality of aging, and it's a scary reality, and it also shows why people need to get started early on their financial education, their financial planning, because every one of these people had regrets of their own and said, okay, I could have done this, this, and this differently, but every one of them had something out of their control happen. So one
Interesting.
woman, she was a single mom for most of her career, having to work a ton of jobs in order to stay afloat. And essentially, she was going to sell her house and downsize, and then the 2008 crash happened, and the home fell out of escrow, and she couldn't sell it, and the home lost all of its equity. So that's just one example. We spoke with a guy who got laid off mid-career, wasn't able to get a job easily, and had to deplete his 401k. There was a guy in there who traveled a lot for work and went into pretty substantial travel and credit card debt. And then we spoke with a woman who lent her friend something like $60,000, and the friend never repaid her. So it's
Oh my
just
goodness.
many instances like that of just poor luck, things not happening at, that should be happening at the right time. So, I mean, they all were very open and saying, okay, well, this is just the reality of aging. It's there's only so much you can do. You can never predict when you're going to get cancer. You can never predict when you're going to get fired from a job. All you can do is really just keep your head on straight, keep powering forward, but also they were very open about, okay, well, you really got to start early. You got to put aside $100 every paycheck when you're young. You have to learn about the stock market and investing, because if you have $1 million, it'll be easier to bounce back from a layoff or a cancer diagnosis versus if you have $50,000.
What have you learned from the series as far as like if you're talking about over 500,000 uh, Americans in their 80s working? What does it say about our society, contemporary times, the world that we're living in?
So this 550,000 number is shocking, but also should be contextualized that it's actually more alarming than it may sound. So we know that just this country is aging, so it might make sense that the number of people continuing to work late in life is increasing just because that's how the generations go. There's bound to be more people kind of with every age cohort continuing to work because it's just that the country has expanded. But what's most interesting is the rate at which people 80 and older, and I guess if you look, it's also transferable to 65 and older, 75 and older. That number, the percentage of people who are 80 and older or 65 and older, compared so the percentage of that demographic that is working compared to the entire generation has been steadily increasing over the last couple of decades. So you have about 4.2% of people 80 and older who are working. About maybe 10 years ago, that was 3%. So that might not seem incredibly sizable, but that is showing a pretty clear increase. And there's all sorts of projections right now that say that the percentage of the workforce that'll be 65 and older or 75 and older is going to drastically increase over the next 10, 20 years. And also what's kind of alarming about this data is that people working at 75 and older is the fastest growing cohort in the labor market. So that you would expect, okay, maybe it's younger people going into work, but based purely on percentage, the 75 and older is the fastest growing, which is pretty alarming, I would say. I sound like a broken record on that point, but there's a lot of research right now that is showing what aging could do to an economy. There's all sorts of concerns right now and documented evidence that an aging economy may slow productivity, may slow GDP growth. So we know that there will be major economic ramifications to this. Also, it's just showing that it's harder to retire in this country, and it's hard to predict what will happen, but there's all sorts of concerns right now that the Social Security, kind of the big Social Security pool of money is being depleted very rapidly. And if that fund does get depleted, if Congress doesn't act on that, it's likely that Social Security checks will be reduced by about 20% starting in the mid 2030s. So that'll obviously impact a lot of people's abilities to retire if they're getting 20% less than they would have. There's a lot of concerns right now, just that inflation is still kind of above the 2% target that the Fed is hoping for every year. So inflation continues to be pretty sticky. The labor market is also on kind of top of everyone's minds right now. And a lot of these workers, they say that they felt very invisible in these discussions about the labor market. So when you look, there's kind of a slightly growing unemployment rate. I mean, that's kind of intended with, but it's the unemployment rate doesn't say everything. There's a lot of people who are underemployed, so the rate at which people are working in jobs where they are not utilizing their full skill set, that number, I don't know the exact percentage, but that number has been kind of shockingly high, according to some recent reports. So there are many, many people who are working in jobs that they took pay cuts to work in. And a lot of those people tend to be older. So maybe mid-career or people in their 50s and their 60s, and definitely for many of the people in their 80s. I mean, they're working, a lot of them say that they're working in kind of menial positions where they were working as big shot accountants or executives or doctors earlier in their career. And for whatever reason, we're out of the workplace for a bit, and now we're working as secretaries or cashiers or truck drivers. So a lot of people had made that transition from either white collar work to blue collar work, or from kind of a more prestigious white collar job to maybe something more entry level. So that's one of the big findings that we took away from is that it's rare that you're seeing people, especially in their 80s, but also in their 60s or 70s, being hired for positions that treat them with the dignity that they might have gotten, 15, 20 years ago in the labor market.
Yeah, that's incredible. I mean, it's just thinking about the future, particularly when you talk about, with Social Security potentially being depleted or people getting less money, which you could say is substandard to survive off of if you don't have any other incomes or savings or investments to live off of. Have you talked to economists or futurists that have given a picture of what our country looks like given this demographic aging? I'd like to know what, even if it might be doom gloom, what it is that you've been told or what you've seen.
Yeah, so I spoke with many economists and aging researchers. In total, I think for the series, I spoke with about 70 something.
Nice.
And all of them had different specialties, obviously, but I would say that it's very mixed, and it's also very hard to predict necessarily what will happen come 10, 20 years from now. But overall, there's a lot of concern right now just at the rate at which the country is aging. One of the most interesting statistics from the series is that in, I think, 2030, there are going to be more workers or more people in this country who are 65 and older than under 18, which is indicative of the fact that the country is aging pretty rapidly, and we're going to need to rely on more labor from older workers because given the fact that there's not as many people 18 and under, that means that a lot of the entry level roles may not be filled. There's likely going to be worker shortages. There already are worker shortages, and we've encountered that whether due to explicit or implicit age discrimination, age bias, a lot of companies are not hiring older workers for whatever reason. And there's a lot of data out there that suggests that older workers are passed over for jobs that involve technology and AI. There was a study that we found from last year that showed that the rate at which hiring managers are even considering applications for older workers in positions that involve AI is, I think it was something like 7 or 8 times less than somebody kind of in their prime years, like in their 20s or their 30s. So we know as a fact that there's kind of a mismatch right now between the capabilities of older workers and what companies want and value. We know for sure that there's a lot of companies that are sort of rewriting some of their policies or making more active efforts to recruit older workers, but definitely there's still a lot of that mismatch. Economists are saying, yeah, that there's probably going to be slowdowns in productivity, there's going to be slowdowns in GDP growth, which will impact everybody's bottom line. And we do engage with the economy as consumers. There's just a lot of economic predictions right now that as the country continues to age, and if there's not ample hiring opportunities, that you're basically just going to be stuck with a growing labor shortages and just kind of an economy that doesn't quite function the way that it should. But also, people are there's a lot of changes right now in just how companies are thinking about benefit structures and retirement, like phase retirement programs. So, a lot of the experts that I spoke with are pretty optimistic about the fact that companies are taking the health and both the physical and the mental health of their employees a lot more seriously. And that's not just for their aging employees, that's for pretty much everyone from the young recruits up to the people who are veterans at the company. And also this idea of kind of phased retirement is very in talks right now. I've spoken with a lot of like economic consultants who have worked with a lot of companies on establishing a retirement system, stop working full time at 65 and maybe work a part-time schedule until their 70s. I think that their companies are treating this a little bit differently. But yeah, the economic picture is very complicated, but economists are concerned about the rate at which we're aging, but also this is not new. Economists stress that they're like, okay, 2025 isn't the first year this has been happening. The country's been aging for decades. And I think many economists are maybe a little frustrated that there hasn't been more written about, particularly for the oldest workers. But certainly there's plenty of optimism in there.
That's interesting. We could look at optimism on that. Now, talking about demographics and changes, you just came back from vacation in Japan. As I understand we were talking about earlier. Now, they have been aging as a country for quite some time. And like you said, it's kind of top bottom change where there's more older workers now than younger. And that's been that way for some time. So what did you observe? I know you weren't there really to study it as much as you were on vacation, but you obviously, as a reporter and always being having an investigative mindset, must have seen it firsthand to some degree.
Yeah. I mean, it was interesting because I was predominantly in Tokyo, so I didn't see as many older workers as maybe going out into the countryside. But it's really interesting when you look at how the US treats its older workers compared to a country like Japan or South Korea. Those two countries are perhaps the first that you would think of when thinking about aging. I'm sure many people have read articles about the people who were making it to their hundreds in Japan. In certain parts of the country, it's not that rare for people to live super long. The and also I don't remember the exact statistic off the top of my head, but I think in South Korea, it's over 30% of people 65 and older still work, which is it's just kind of the whether it's a cultural reason or reasons pertaining to just how people feel about their wallet. I know as a fact with Japan that there's been some demographic shifts where you mentioned, yes, the country has been aging. There's also a lot of labor shortages that force companies to basically retain their older workers. Japan has also had a lot of pension reforms recently, which has made it harder for people to retire. And also, I've heard from some experts that because people, are staying healthier for longer, and because of kind of shifts in corporate practices in Japan, that it's much harder to really transition between companies there. So people kind of just stay with a company for a while. Um, so we've noticed that it's similar to the US, but also very different in terms of that companies in Japan might want to hold on to their workers compared to maybe in the US where they want to phase them out in their 50s or their 60s. But yeah, definitely it's been interesting to see it firsthand that the just culturally, I think that a country like Japan does kind of, people stay at a job for 40 years.
Is that because they're valued, or is it more like a community family type thing that you just don't let your workers go like here where everyone's expendable? I mean, what's your perspective on that?
I'm not entirely sure if it's all because of it's family oriented. I think it's just with US, I think that there's a lot of job hopping that happens. I don't think that with my parents' generation, I mean, my parents are both in their 60s. They would love to have, kind of stayed at a company for longer. It's just
Get that golden watch.
yeah. But I think that, back in the day, you stayed at a company for 30 years because of the pension system. I mean, you worked at a place for 30 years, or you work for the government or as a teacher for 30 years, and then you get your pension and you say, all right, I'm out. But given the fact that we don't really have as prevalent of pensions in the US anymore, I mean, that's a reason why I think the younger generations have said, okay, well, I'm going to bounce around. In Japan, I know that the younger generations have also been doing that, maybe to a lesser extent. I know that the pension system is mandatory, and there's like two tiers to it in Japan. It's also kind of like a pay-as-you-go type model. So, there's kind of like a national pension, not to get too in the weeds, but I know in Japan there's a national pension for people 20 to 60. And then there's kind of an like employee pension insurance. So that's mandatory for employees that work at firms, and that's tied to your earnings. So I basically it's a little bit different in Japan. So I think that people kind of stay with a company for a little bit longer just because they still have that pension system. And also I think culturally it's, I think people in Japan view work a little bit differently than they view it in the US. At least when I was there, it seemed everyone took their jobs very seriously, whether or not they like them or not. I felt like everyone from the corporate workers who are all buttoned up in their suits and ties to the people, working at the convenience stores all showed the same level of care in their jobs, versus I know in the US that is very much not the case. I mean, there's all sorts of articles that I read in the US about people who go on vacations, but are still quote unquote on. I don't think they do that really in Japan. So I think that's another reason of just kind of you stay dedicated to one company, you try to build yourself up at that particular company. Um, and yeah, but there, I mean, there is camaraderie. I saw a lot of people out and about, with their coworkers, but I'm
I mean,
not an
besides going
expert
to
in
the
that.
bars and drinking after work, I mean, it's more like just the companion, like this is my buddy.
Yeah, I mean, there was some drinking.
But yeah, definitely. Let me just really quickly reintroduce you. So we're talking about retirement and in America, what it looks like to be working in your 80s. And we're talking with Noah Scheidlower, who's the senior economic reporter with Business Insider. And he's been doing this series for quite some time about retirement and the regrets older Americans have about their lives, having to still have to work at an older age and what that's like. So no, it's interesting that you studied sociology. So I imagine that had to be part of your interest. And I'm just curious what type of insight that might have given you in looking at this, which I would say is a problem. If you're wanting to retire and you can't, and you're forced to work, and whether you say it's fortunate to be able to work and have a job, the condition that we are in as a society.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I joke that I'm not actually a journalist. I'm kind of like a sociologist in many ways, because I would say a lot of the work that I do is more ethnographic in meaning that I am kind of going out into the fields a lot of the time. I'm doing interviews that maybe aren't your traditional 15-minute interview. I mean, a lot of the ones that I do are an hour to 2 hours long, where we're really trying to just get deep into a person's life and understand their struggles and their hardships and their successes. And yeah, I mean, I've covered people across the country. This is also kind of a method that we use in sociology, which is, it's field work. It's you're going out, you're exploring, you're looking with your own eyes. So that's what I valued about going to Japan. But it's also, for the series, I went to 9 states for it, and some of them were for work, where I very much intended on I'm going to visit, this person in this state. So I did that, for a couple out in Connecticut. And I followed them for a few days. I did that for a woman out in Arkansas for a few days. Um, but for some states, it was just I happened to be, they figured I might as well just try to talk to the people while there, which is something that was interesting, and it's something that I learned, in sociology too. Typically, you want to preface, all interviews by not like shocking them out of the blue. But I did find some people who worked at, for example, like there was a worker out in Kansas who I was just there on a trip and bumped into a worker in Kansas, and got to speak with them and did a follow-up call. And I feel like that's just kind of one of the routes that you take in sociology. But certainly, sociology is also okay. You're looking at the problems in society from more of a systematic perspective versus, what one person's story is saying. So that's also why we wanted to build a large sample size of sources for this, which is why we ended up with almost 200 workers in addition to experts. And also, we spoke with about 50 or a little over 50 loved ones and colleagues of workers just to verify details. So, all in all, there were about a little over 300 interviews for the
Wow.
series, which just took a lot of work and a lot of, I was gonna say sleepless nights. I work a 9 to 5, but 9 to 6, a lot of 9 to 6s a lot of the time. But yeah, there's no data set on this population beyond what the census shows. And we wanted to build our own kind of consortium of people to say, okay, well, here's just a subset, a small subset, but a very representative subset of who is working in this country. So we really wanted to humanize their stories and also get more at the systemic issues that kind of plague a lot of these people. So we didn't want it to just be looking at people who loved what they did. We wanted to focus for the series predominantly on people who had to continue working. So in addition to doing those interviews, we did a lot of we did some I guess I'm thinking about this from a sociology perspective of when you have kind of that annotated bibliography at the end where you're just compiling other experts and other papers and other findings. So I did a version of that as well for this. So I've read a lot of academic papers as part of the series and really just tried to get as in-depth a look at whatever the research is that's out there to complement a lot of the real people that I was speaking with.
Yeah, it's really incredible. I mean, it sounds like it's a book, really, which it could be like No Retirement in America or what
Yeah.
this is like. That's really incredible. No, I know you got a hard stop. Plus, you got your holiday party happening and everything. Is there like, let's say somebody outside of reading your series, like maybe is there the videos or some of the other things you're talking about? Is that accessible anywhere or on your website that we could direct viewers to?
Yeah, so the video is on YouTube on our Business Insider page. It's part of our Life Lessons series. So that video was posted about 10 days ago, so it should be easily accessible. And then on my author page, yeah, we have two articles that basically capture every single story in the series. So we do have a landing page and we have kind of the final story in the series, both of which include every other story in kind of a centralized place. So happy to distribute that.
Yeah, and I could put a link in there as well. So you have about what, three more articles in the series coming out? Is that what about right?
Yeah, two to three big ones, and then we have some smaller profiles coming out.
Well, we definitely got to get you nominated for a Pulitzer or something there.
Fingers
So,
crossed, but you never know.
yeah. So yeah, no, it's really, really incredible. We've been speaking with Noah Scheidlower, who's so this series that people have been talking about in the field about working in your 80s, and talking about, the fear that most Americans have. Are they going to be able to retire? And Business Insider has been actually really great to allow you to just continue with one particular theme and to let you work like that. So hopefully you have a really great holiday party before everyone crowds in the room there. You're very generous with your time. Is there anything else that we should add or before we close out the interview that you want to say?
Yeah, again, I think that this series is very comprehensive, but there's still a lot to learn and a lot to continue doing. So I'm continuing to do more report. I want to do a little bit more on the experience of aging in a more rural area, where there aren't as many opportunities. I have been fascinated by by the widows that I speak with and what that experience has been like of losing a loved one late in life and having to navigate the finances. And I'm also taking a look at kind of the growing prevalence of scams that have forced a lot of older Americans to return to work. So there's a lot that I have done, but there's many, many, many more people to speak with and more angles to continue covering. So I will be hard at work on that, hopefully in the next year.
Oh yeah, I look forward to that. And the scams itself could be a series. There's no
Yeah.
question about that. Yeah.